We already have well over 100 folks in the room, so I'm really excited to see that we have a topic here that is of interest to you. I work at the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services and am the project lead on our front for Strong Family Safe Communities. With me today, you see Faye, you'll get to hear a lot from her, but also my partner at Developmental Disabilities, Holly Jones, who was able to connect me with Faye and coordinate this training for us today. So thank you so much, Holly, for that. Just some quick housekeeping items before I hand this over and we get into the presentation. There is continuing education credits available for this training today. We will drop a evaluation link at the end of the session in the chat, and then we will also follow up with the attendee emails that are in here today and make sure you get an eval link. You will need to go ahead and complete that evaluation to ensure that we have all the information we need to get your credit and get you your training certificate. So please don't forget to do that. The session today is 90 minutes long, so it is an hour and a half worth of credit. So just an FYI on that. In terms of questions and how we're going to handle that, Faye has a lot to share with us this morning. So we are going to try to see if we have a few minutes at the end for questions, but if not, you see that Faye's email is there readily available. So if you have any follow-up or anything like that, I'm sure she would be really happy to hear from you all after the presentation with your amazing questions that you have. So before I hand it over to Faye, maybe we should hear a little bit about who she is. I have an awesome quick bio here to read to share her expertise and what she will be able to bring to the presentation today. So Laura Faye Perkins has over 20 years experience working with traumatized populations, including professionals who experience secondary trauma. Faye is a master's level social worker and holds certifications in trauma responsive care and integrated mental health. She is currently employed by Central Clinic Behavioral Health as a behavioral health consultant to Children's Services staff. She is a trainer and coach for the Ohio Child Welfare Training Program and Ohio Human Services Training System. Faye recently opened her own trauma-informed practice, Wellness, which you see the awesome logo here. Training and individual mental health treatment and wellness coaching throughout the state of Ohio. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Faye. We are recording the session, so you probably got a notification on that. But yeah, sit back, enjoy the time, and I hope you guys all learned something new. Thanks, Faye.
Thank you so much, Elena. Thank you so much, Elena, and thank you also to Holly for organizing this event today. Welcome, everyone. I am so excited to be here with you today to learn more about the need for wellness in the workplace to support our work as helping professionals and as caregivers. And I hope that we'll also have some time to have fun, relax, and refill our cups today. So today is considered a love letter to all the helpers, all the professionals who give their time and energy. And you're invited to participate in some self-care activities. You're also invited to modify them in any way that is best for you. So you can choose to opt out of any of the activities that you choose, but it's important for us to realize that we can't participate in self-care as spectators. We have to be able to learn. I hear that we're having some audio issues and I do have a mic on. I'm hoping it'll pick up. If not, I'm just going to have to get extremely loud, I think. So again, you may modify these activities in any way that you choose. And you may choose to opt out of any of the activities that are uncomfortable for you, but it's important to recognize that we can't actually experience self-care as spectators. We have to try these activities to see if there's something that we feel comfortable. So keep in mind that these are simply suggestions for self-care tools, and each one of us is going to have to build our own individualized toolbox. Feel free to reject any interventions that are not right for you. I've made efforts to focus on interventions or resources that are accessible and free, and you all will have access to a resource list that I believe Holly is going to share in the chat with you. Our ability to practice self-care or our comfort with practicing some activities can be influenced by our culture, our gender identity and expression, our sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, and our spiritual orientation. And let's recognize that the research tells us that those of us who experience intersectionality or belong to groups who face oppression or have faced oppression might find it challenging to engage in some forms of self-care. Groups often have to work harder, they have to hustle in order to make it an even playing field, and so they might view self-care or wellness as an indulgence, as a waste of resources, or their trauma may tell them that they have to spend their energy and time pouring into others or advancing their causes. It's important for us to realize this, and in this space, we're free of judgment. No one should feel any shame or guilt for participating in self-care or choosing to opt out of self-care. I also invite you to set an intention for our time together today. And an intention is a way of giving your day some direction. So rather than letting the day happen to you, it's a way of exerting some control over your day, of recognizing what's important to your mind, body, and spirit, and trying to realize that. Let's spend a few moments setting an intention. Here are several examples. My intention today is to normalize the experience of burnout and secondary trauma and to provide resources for achieving and maintaining wellness while we're doing this very difficult work. So our objectives are to identify signs of work-related stress, secondary trauma, and PTSD in ourselves and in others, to seek support and resources, develop a stronger understanding of what's called trauma-informed self-care, which includes both individual and organizational. Reduce and manage stress associated with our work. If you'd like to further assess or understand if you're experiencing burnout or secondary trauma, you're invited to use this professional quality of life scale, the ProQual 5. There's a link to this on the resource list that you'll all be given. And each of you will receive this list, and it's got several other measures that you can use to kind of self-assess where you are in your wellness journey. So let's begin by showing ourselves a little bit of love today. This is a brief mindfulness meditation. Meditation has been shown in the research to reduce stress and to improve attention and focus with regular practice. So this will give us an opportunity to let go of our to-do list, all the thoughts swirling around in our brains, to get our brains prepared for learning and to care for ourselves. We are purposefully paying attention. We simply observe without judging. If we're aware of our inner experience, then we'll be aware when we experience any negativity. When we notice this shift in our mood, then we have the power to change anything about our mood. We have the power to address any negativity that we experience. This is a key component in our wellness and practicing trauma-informed self-care, to notice our inner experience and to take steps to attend to that challenging feeling and nurture ourselves back to our baseline. Without mindfulness, we're at greater risk for unknowingly slipping into our stress response. The toll from the helping work has been defined in many ways. It's been called many different things. But essentially, each of these points to the same toll. We are exposed to the suffering of others. We are affected as well. So when the demands on our system outweigh the resources that we have available, overwhelm ensues, and it kicks our thinking brain offline. We no longer have access to the smartest part of our brain. This is the core definition of trauma, where the demands on our central nervous system outweigh the resources, causing us to have an automatic stress response. Stress response is a natural response. It occurs automatically when we perceive a threat in our environment. And I want to stress that each of us, no matter how mentally well we are, can automatically enter survival mode when we feel threatened. In survival mode, there are no choices or preferences. There's no chronological age. We are no longer the mature professionals you see before us. We are unable to think clearly in survival mode. We cannot regulate our emotions, and we cannot learn from our mistakes. There are 4 typical stress responses that occur, as you may know. They're fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And while you've likely heard of these, you may not understand all behaviors that can fall under these stress responses. So fight, we understand, is characterized by angry outbursts, but it can also be characterized by blaming, controlling others, dictatorial tendencies, demanding perfection from others. Flight, we can think of as literally fleeing the scene, leaving abruptly, but it can also manifest in escaping from a trigger or from a threat through workaholism, through perfectionism, or through busyness, where we use lots of activities to distract us from the threat, which is often our feelings or our thoughts. Those are often the trigger that can send us into survival mode. And then we have freeze, whereby we are immobilized, very much like a deer in headlights. However, even though we feel paralyzed, we are highly activated internally, still being flooded with a number of stress response. I hear that we're still having trouble with volume, and I'm not quite sure how to, let me get closer to the microphone. The microphone was working perfectly well earlier, so I apologize. I'll speak up as much as I can. So with freeze, we are highly activated internally, but outwardly, we seem to be paralyzed. We may shut down. We may check out mentally. We may dissociate. We may hide. We may become very small in an effort to avoid the threat. However, when we are frozen, we don't metabolize all of the stress hormones that our body releases. Whereas in fight or flight, we're actually exerting some energy and metabolizing those stress hormones. And then finally, we have fawn, which is also known as faint. This is when we cannot sustain the internal activation that happens in either of the preceding states. In this state, we feel helpless to change our situation. We feel powerless. We will often do anything to avoid conflict. We won't stand up for ourselves, and we can be easily exploited. We lose our sense of self when we're in this state, and we become concerned only with the needs and the happiness of others. So why is it important to understand our stress responses? Well, trauma, secondary trauma, and burnout lead to a frequent activation of the stress response. And this frequent activation of the stress response, meaning we go into survival mode even when it's not a life or death situation, can lead to difficulty in completing our work, can lead to frequent mood dysregulation. It can lead to the deterioration of our relationships because of interpersonal problems that occur when we're in survival mode. Because of the flood of stress hormones associated with this frequent activation, our physical health can also deteriorate, leading to compromised immunity, illness, and fatigue. So when we develop self-awareness that we are experiencing a stress response, we can address any negativity that we are experiencing before we fully launch into survival mode. So most importantly, perhaps, is noticing the cues that our body gives us, noticing when our heart rate speeds up, noticing if our becomes shallow, noticing when we are about to enter the stress response from these cues in our body. These body cues come from the vagus nerve. This is the information superhighway that runs between the brain and the body. And we've often thought in the past that the brain is in control, that it's the command center. However, 80% of the information traveling the vagus nerve travels from the body to the brain. So it's very important for us to understand what the body is telling us. So this vagus nerve, which wanders all over our body, that's how it gets its name. It comes from the word wanderer. It can be toned very much like a muscle. And studies tell us that when we have greater vagal tone, when our vagus nerve is toned, we are better able to regulate strong emotion and stay grounded, avoiding entering that survival mode. So we can use an activity to tone our vagus nerve. I'm going to teach this to you. This is something that you can use in the moment when you need to de-escalate from a triggering situation, or it's something that you can use on a regular basis to tone your vagus nerve so that over time you have enhanced emotional regulation. This is adapted from a practice in a book I'm going to share with you. This is on your resource list. It's 101 Mindful Ways to Build Resilience by Donald Altman. And this is a practice that's taught to Navy SEALs to use before they enter challenging missions. So we start with our hands at the center of our chest, and we're going to take a deep inhale, a belly breath. Or another way to think about our inhale is expanding our rib cage on all sides to fill up our lungs, even to the bottom. So as we take our deep inhale, we bring our hands out to our sides, pause, and then take a slow exhale as we bring our hands back together. So join me if you'd like for a couple rounds of this. Take a deep inhale, pause, a slow exhale, which engages the parasympathetic nervous system, puts the brakes on strong emotion. Again, deep inhale, pause, slow exhale. Our hands back together, activating that parasympathetic nervous system. One more, deep inhale, pause, and a slow exhale as we bring our hands back together. As I mentioned, this is something you can use in the moment. I've seen this work with a consultee of mine who came to me one day and said, I started crying and the floodgates are open now. They just won't close, but I have to testify in court in a few minutes. And we did a few rounds of that. And she said, oh, I forgot how that grounds me, and just went on with her day. She had a completely dry face by that point. So I've seen this work firsthand. One of the best resources I'm going to share with you is this book that's pictured to the left here. This is called Trauma Stewardship. It's written by Laura Vandernoot-Lipsky and Connie Burke. Laura also has an outstanding TEDx talk called Beyond the Cliff. It's rather long, so I won't be playing it today, but I do play it in some of my longer presentations. And she also has a website called traumastewardship.com, and this infographic comes from there. A little bit more about the toll that this work can take on us. So you can see here that this work or experiencing overwhelm and exposure to trauma can lead us to feel helpless, hopeless, like we can never do enough. It can make us hypervigilant, whereby we're always activated, perhaps always on edge, always serious. We see anger and cynicism. And cynicism is defined as inappropriate attitudes or negative attitudes, a loss of idealism, reduced feelings of empathy. Oftentimes we can relate to cynical humor. Perhaps if we make a joke and it doesn't quite land with our loved ones who aren't in this field, that's a bit of our cynical humor shining through. And it can really wreak some havoc on our relationships, and it can cause us to think very negatively about the folks that we're serving. We see an increase in so-called negative emotions. I like to think of emotions like colors of the rainbow. None of them are negative. They're all different. But we see more guilt, fear. We see grieving that goes on longer or is more intense than average grief. We see a lack of awe, where people are no longer inspired. They can't find any situation to be awe-inspiring. a sense of persecution when people are starting to feel victimized in their roles. And that's when we might see some unethical behavior. If people are feeling victimized or persecuted, that's when we see people who are saying, well, I'm going to stay on the clock for another hour, but I'm not going to get anything done, because they feel that it's owed to them, or they may be entitled to it because they're feeling persecuted. We see the survival response we've already mentioned: fight, flight, and freeze. Dissociation, which is when we check out mentally. So it's an adaptive capacity that our brain has, but when we're checking out while we should be gathering important information, or while we're trying to be present with our clients, it's very ineffective. The inability to see other options and diminished creativity, we can actually risk part of our brain atrophying and being unable to see creative options. We see physical ailments, and these can be headaches, muscle tension. We see a great deal of digestive distress. And when our stress response is being activated over and over again, it makes sense. It stops our digestion. So digestion is starting and stopping and starting and stopping multiple times a day, which can result in that full spectrum of irritable bowel symptoms. We also see depression, anxiety, other mental health considerations, and we see post-traumatic stress disorder from folks who have been exposed to trauma in their work. We see folks who are taking in so much information that their central nervous system becomes overloaded and they are chronically feeling exhausted, especially if they're not moving out some of the energy, which, as we'll see, is necessary for metabolizing all of the experiences we have in this work. We see folks who are pulled toward a confirmation bias, which means that they're going to folks who will agree with them. They're only seeking feedback from an echo chamber. And that can pull folks away from critical thinking, and it can result in groupthink. It can result in the systemic biases that we see in our work. We see folks who have a lack of presence, who deliberately avoid suffering, deliberately avoid hearing trauma. We see those who become very intense, rigid, controlling, and they see things in very black and white terms. They're no longer able to embrace the gray areas. And if there's one thing I know, it's that we are working with some of the most complex individuals, families in our culture. So we have to be able to embrace complexity. If we're ever being so simplistic as we're seeing people in terms of a good guy or a bad guy, then we're being too reductionistic. We're not embracing complexity. We see people being disheartened and dispirited. We see a sense of grandiosity, or a sense of inflated sense of importance about our work. So I have an example to illustrate this. When I was a brand new child welfare caseworker, I had dinner with my friend one evening after work, and she asked how my day was. And I said, oh, it was a really challenging day today. I had to go to court and testify, and I also had to move a child to a new placement. And that's always so traumatizing when you leave a child in a placement that they've never spent the night in before. Not only is it traumatizing to the child, but also to the work. So it's been a really tough day. How was yours? My friend said, well, we ran out of cups today. And I thought to myself, cups? I'm talking about life or death decision making, the gravity of the choices that we make in this work. And she's talking about cups. But she ran a Starbucks. So cups were extremely important for her role. But I was really minimizing that and dismissing the importance because of this sense of grandiosity and this very important work that we do. We experience a negativity bias, where we are biologically wired to pay attention to the fires that we have to put out. But when we can only see the negatives, that means we're not assuming well. It means we might border on paranoia, where we always question others' motives and we don't give the benefit of the doubt. We see sub-impeccable or toxic conduct and compromised impulse control. So that can happen when we stop monitoring ourselves. For instance, when I first got into this field, I was raised to always respect my elders and always respect my subordinates, or excuse me, my superiors and my subordinates for that matter. But when you have people yelling at you every day, it can start to make us lose sight of our own impulse control or our own monitoring, and we can start to be irritable and angry, even towards our superiors. I think I skipped over difficulty empathizing, minimizing, numbing to the pain that we see. And that's a risk of becoming cynical, a risk of us having done this work for such a long time that we say, oh, this is just like every other case that I've encountered with these stressors, where we kind of cut people's story off without viewing them as individuals. We also see addictions, and addictions can be to substances, to alcohol, but they can also be to things that we think of as fairly benign, like food, like social media, like shopping. I was a very well-dressed caseworker because I think I had a bit of an addiction to the so-called retail therapy. And we see loneliness, isolation, and strained relationships that result because we want to avoid connection at times. It becomes really exhausting to try to connect with people outside of our work, and it can really take a toll on our relationships. So I encourage you to check out more of Laura's resources at traumastewardship.com and to check out this book, Trauma Stewardship, and her TED Talk as well, Beyond the Cliff. So this might sound very overwhelming. Here's the good news. We know that resilience is possible. With intentional, consistent effort, we can heal from this toll that caregiving and helping takes on us. So resilience is defined as adapting to challenges, bouncing back from adversity, or the ability to navigate to resources that sustain us through challenging times. Those resources have historically been framed as self-care. But today we're going to go beyond typical ideas of self-care into a framework for authentic wellness that sustains us through truly challenging times. Let's start by understanding what's meant by true self-care, and then we'll dig a little deeper into trauma-informed self-care and wellness. The concept of self-care has been misunderstood. True self-care is about sustenance, about sustaining ourselves through challenging times, about nurturing ourselves, maybe watering ourselves, rather than seeking pleasure through immediate gratification. It's not a distraction or numbing. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Self-care requires reflection, becoming aware of your thoughts, your feelings, and how you show up. It requires presence and attending to your internal experiences, determining what you need in order to be resilient. And it requires a commitment to personal growth and consistent, intentional effort. Trauma-informed self-care requires us to gauge our emotional gas tank, which again means we cannot be numb to what we're feeling. Self-care is imperative to ethical practice because it's necessary to ensure that we are in an emotional state that we can do our job well without causing harm to anyone else. When we are numb or distracted, we cannot gauge whether or not we are doing harm. For instance, we could be relying on our implicit bias, could be on autopilot, just going through the motions. But this work really requires that we're truly present to what we're feeling. As a consumer-driven society, we in the US often consume, whether that be goods, shopping, food, social media, news, devices, alcohol, substances, gossip. We can become addicted to any distraction that gives us a chemical reward, that gives us a hit of dopamine. And as we consume, we're not eliminating painful emotions. We're simply stuffing them down, and those emotions keep building, building, building until we are literally bursting at the seams and we can't keep the emotion in anymore. We truly have to metabolize everything that we're experiencing rather than consuming things on top of it. And this could involve psychotherapy, but it can also involve many other forms of wellness. So I use the awkward Yeti cartoons to give us a little humor today. This is the battle between the heart and the brain, the emotional and the rational sides. So self-care is not numbing by getting sucked into social media. It's not numbing by getting sucked into watching the news. As we can see here, watching the news can hurt our heart. It is not simply giving up, collapsing when we feel exhausted. It's not running away from reality with something else.
Okay, how are you? Oh,
It's
the doorknob
not
got
overdoing the good stuff. It's not adding to
Bill
our
fixed
list of
it.
vices. At the beginning of the pandemic, when I decided to try all of Grater's ice cream flavors, that wasn't true self-care, if I'm being honest. And it's also not believing that a vacation is going to make everything better, because as we all know, when we return from vacation, the work is still there, sometimes even more. So self-care is this necessary tool, not about immediate gratification or indulgences. It takes a great deal of discipline. And self-care is only one piece of the puzzle. The concept of self-care does not negate the fact that our organizations have their responsibility for leadership, for communication, for providing a safe workplace for all of us. Historical ideas of self-care can often make caregivers and helping professionals feel as though they have to take on all of the burden, all of the responsibility for maintaining wellness, even though their trauma exposure comes from their employment. And I do remind folks that's the case of all trauma. The person who is surviving trauma didn't cause it, but they're still responsible for their own healing. However, trauma-informed self-care is a concept that recognizes the responsibility of both individuals and their organizations in preventing and healing from the toll from this work. So this comes from the University of South Florida, Allison Salome and colleagues. They define trauma-informed self-care. It includes being aware of our emotional experience in response to exposure to traumatized clients, and then planning and engaging in positive coping strategies. So again, it requires us to be mindful of what we're experiencing and then to take steps to deal with those feelings. The original trauma-informed self-care practices, which are not pictured here, they are from 2015, and all of them began with the word I, which again made caregivers and helpers feel like all of the responsibility was on them. But this is a revised trauma-informed care practices and support scale that gives us a realistic and fair framework for a collaborative approach to staff wellness, whereby our organizations take responsibility for some forms of self-care, and we as individuals take responsibility for some forms of self-care. In fact, this trauma-informed self-care is so important. It's so important for us to be aware of what we're feeling and be able to gauge whether we are doing any harm, to self-reflect on our practice and on the parallel process or the interaction between our organization, our clients, ourselves, and how that affects us. That in 2021, the NASW amended their code of ethics to include this statement: that self-care is paramount, competent, and ethical practice. So again, we see it's not an indulgence. It is necessary to do our jobs well. And even the business world is now talking about trauma-informed self-care. This comes from a recent Harvard Business Review article where the authors emphasize that human connection is necessary for managing our stress, and that self-care in isolation can undermine our well-being because attachment and connection are imperative. The research is telling us that feeling disconnected to others is a significant health risk that's present for a lot of people since the pandemic. So this concept of wellness going beyond self-care has to do with us having relational pauses work through emotional difficulties that we have in our work together. It requires a collaborative approach. So now we're going to move into some other wellness resources and practices, and we'll start with organizational practices. We need our organizations to promote work-life balance. That might mean offering schedule flexibility, certainly adhering to a 40-hour work week, as we know that that mitigates the effects of burnout and secondary trauma. We want to pay attention to populations who experience additional secondary trauma. For instance, if folks have been dealing with extreme cases of abuse or neglect, we want to offer debriefing. That's one of the things that I do in my full-time role as a behavioral health consultant, is help folks debrief from critical incidents. And some organizations are even offering extra relief time following critical incidents to allow folks time to process and get resilient before they return to the job. We also want to provide caseload mix or balanced caseloads by ensuring that we're not putting too many traumatizing cases on one person's plate. We tend to rely very heavily on our veteran workers for this, but we need to be balancing to the best of our ability. We want to normalize self-care practices within the organization. So normalizing lunch breaks rather than asking people to work through them. Normalizing time for staff to socialize and connect for team building events. And hopefully your organizations also have access to an employee assistance program or professional consultation so that individuals truly have a safe space to process everything that they're experiencing in regard to their trauma exposure in this work. We can also create institutionalized support networks that center on self-care and resilience. So the Child Welfare Agency that I'm contracted to work with offers Resilience Alliance groups. And these are groups that meet for an hour on a weekly basis. An entire unit comes at once, and they're facilitated by 2 trauma coordinators who teach resilience skills. And the groups last 1 hour a week for 6 months. So folks really have the opportunity to get to know their unit well. They're usually a couple units in one group, so they meet folks from other units, they build relationships. And some of them have even taken on the challenges of creating these institutionalized networks. One example of this is one of our staff said, we always have to work late to catch up on paperwork. Why don't we do it together? Let's have a pizza and paperwork evening where we share a meal after our regular work hours. And then we all kind of retreat to our cubicles and do our paperwork at the same time so that we're all getting caught up, but we still have a sense of community. We see peer mentoring programs that have a great deal of success where folks feel like they can rely on their peers to support them. Check-in groups as a unit or a team, even when working remotely, making the time to still get together, even if it's virtually. Maybe even having team lunches from time to time, especially if folks are working remotely. We've had folks who have suggested over the summer that we meet at a local park, and anyone who can come is welcome to come check in. Supervisor-worker interpersonal interactions. So that means that in supervision, we're not simply talking about our clients or our cases. We're also checking in emotionally. We're having those relational pauses where we focus on getting to know one another as human beings, not just as employees. And again, we want to pay special attention to our vulnerable subgroups, the individuals who have limited resources, who are isolated, who may be marginalized because they may not have accessibility to practice self-care. So as we're getting started on a wellness practice, I have a couple of tips to keep in mind. It would be overwhelming to change everything at once. So start with one small thing that we're going to change and go one small thing at a time. Start by choosing activities that you want to do. So if you're not a runner, you don't want to commit to running as your self-care practice. You want to find an activity that you think you'll find enjoyable or that something that sparks your curiosity that you're interested in. You can let your values guide your goals. You can even choose an identity that you want to cultivate. For instance, say you want to become a healthier person. You can ask yourself, what would a healthy person do to help you pick your goal? And you want to use SMART goals. So that's specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. Rather than saying, I'm going to get in shape, you might say, I'm going to do 10 push ups on my lunch break right beside my desk at 12 p.m. For the next 6 weeks, and then I'll reevaluate. That's an example of a SMART goal. You want to design systems in the form of habits that support your goal. So you can show up for just the 2-minute version a day to get a habit started. If you want to write a book, start by writing for 2 minutes. If you want to get better at flossing, start by flossing just one tooth. If you want to become a writer, start by writing 1 page, and so forth. You can also begin by self-assessing where you are. And as I mentioned, each of you has a number of tools at your disposal on your resource list that you can use to self-assess where you are in your resource journey, or I'm sorry, in your wellness journey. And then you resource yourself. So as I mentioned, each of you received a resources handout, and we're also going to hear about DODD's Wellness Project.
Welcome to the Wellness Project webpage. This is an overview tour of the webpage. The Wellness Project is a multimedia, multi-experiential compilation of resources to support individual wellness. The purpose of this webpage is to discover a variety of ways for supporting helping professionals so that you can show up as the best version of yourself. We need and deserve to take care of ourselves so that we can take care of others. Learning and healing happen in relationship. We need each other. The Ohio Department of Developmental Disabilities supports staff wellness. On this page, you will find tabs labeled Read, Listen, Watch, Taste, Explore, and Experience. The tab Read is where you will find book recommendations, articles, and papers. Listen includes podcast shows, interviews, stories, and music playlists. Watch includes recorded webinars about a variety of topics from national and state presenters. Taste includes tasty recipes to support a healthy lifestyle. Explore includes resources for organizations to support staff mental well-being. Experience includes mindful, rhythmic movements, breath practices, and meditation. These practices are grounded in neuroscience and are trauma sensitive. They are accessible, practical, and empowering. These can be done anytime, including on the job, to renew your energy, calm your mind, and support your nervous system. We will continually add to this site to build a rich library of content and experiences. Keep coming back for more webinars, podcasts, recipes, resources, and active resilience practices.
So thank you to Holly for that brief tour, and I hope you all check out this resource. There's some really outstanding things here. So I hope that my volume is better. I truly apologize for the issues that we've had today. But now we're going to move into the main event, the Dimensions of Wellness. This comes to us from the National Wellness Institute, and they have a number of outstanding resources on their site. So there are many ways to frame wellness, but we're going to use their dimensions to carry us through this discussion today. This is the NWI's Wellness Focus Survey tool, and it's a great way for you to become intentional about how you might want to improve your wellness. So it's something for you to do on your own time to kind of evaluate where you are in cultivating wellness today. And even if the starting point of your journey is right here, right now, today is a great time to start your wellness journey. Don't be discouraged no matter where you are in the journey to wellness. So occupational wellness is about personal satisfaction and enrichment in our lives through work. So we want to consider, does our work align to our values, beliefs, talents, and gifts? Do we find it rewarding, enjoyable, meaningful? Does our work offer challenges that we can handle? Am I learning new skills, or am I checked out, inactive, uninvolved? And does my employer offer some of the supports for trauma-informed self-care? And if not, how can I possibly lead this effort? So this is an occupational wellness practice that was suggested by Laura Vandernoot-Lipsky, the author of Trauma Stewardship. I think it's a brilliant thing that we can do. Spending our last day, or our last minute of the workday, our last minute on the clock on agency time, we can intentionally contemplate or even write down what is one thing that is going well, or one thing that went well today. So keep in mind that we have a negativity bias where we are constantly focused on all the fires that need our attention. And it requires us to become intentional about noticing and celebrating our successes. So there are a couple other activities you could do right at the end of your workday to support your occupational wellness, particularly if you have a hard time transitioning from your professional world to your personal world. So you can use routines that signal that you're moving from one sphere to the other. For instance, when I'm working at home, I make sure that I close everything up and put it away, even my calendar, even my laptop, out of sight, out of mind. That's a cue that the workday is finished. You can, very much like Mr. Rogers used to do, change clothes or change shoes to signify the end of the workday. Or you can use a cleansing ritual, like washing your hands, taking a shower, figuratively or literally washing the day out of your hair. When I used to commute, I would determine a point in my commute, usually my exit ramp, where I can no longer think about work-related thoughts. And does that mean that there won't be any work-related thoughts that pop into my mind? Certainly not. But that means that now it's my responsibility. I've made a commitment to letting go of those thoughts, choosing not to attach to them or ruminate over them. You can also do a spiritual practice like a prayer or a meditation, or use some physical movement, exercising, walking, getting outdoors, maybe even connecting with your loved ones to help you feel nurtured and to signify that it's the end of the workday. This is a mindfulness technique that I'm going to teach you all that you can use when you are being exposed to traumatic material. So say that a client is telling you a really painful story, or you're hearing from one of your colleagues some of the difficulties that they're experiencing. There's a way that we can prevent ourselves from absorbing others' emotion. That's typically what we think of as empathy. However, there are multiple types of empathy. There's cognitive empathy, where we can recognize what someone else is feeling, but we don't take it on. Very often our doctors have that type of empathy. There's emotional empathy, where we feel what the other person is feeling. But that also means if they are on an emotional roller coaster ride, then we are along for the ride. We are sitting shotgun on that roller coaster ride. And so what we want to strive for is compassionate empathy, where we recognize what others are feeling, but we don't absorb the emotions. We are motivated to help them, but we can stay grounded and recognize the separation between their emotions and ours. So to do this mindfulness technique, we simply place our attention on our heart center, the center of our chest. And we're not identifying a body feeling, or I'm sorry, we're not identifying an emotional feeling. We're not noticing if we feel sad or if we feel angry. We are focused on the feeling in our body. Does our chest feel tight? Does it feel constricted or tense? Or does it feel open, relaxed, and spacious? We can even imagine placing a warm blanket over this area, or turning this area from ice to water, from water to vapor. And as we feel our chest open up, this sets a natural, loving boundary that prevents us from absorbing the emotions of the other person. It gives us a feeling of spaciousness, where you're able to actually lean into the suffering without being greatly affected by it. One other form of occupational self-care is financial self-care. So yes, sometimes self-care can be sitting down and paying bills. There are a number of resources on your resource list for this as well. So now moving into physical wellness, which is about maintaining balance in the body through nutrition, movement, rest, and recovery. Physical activity helps us to move energy or emotion out of our body. It is really true that our body keeps the score. And it also allows us to get in touch with our bodies. Physical activity is the only way that we can metabolize everything that we are experiencing. So our goal is that we can metabolize all of the experiences and move this energy through in a number of different activities that hopefully we will enjoy. The goal is to raise our heart rate and break a sweat for 6 days a week. But if we're not at the place where we can do this for 20, 30 minutes yet, starting small is perfect. We can build up. I was working with a consultee who had some mobility issues. It was painful to walk, and she really wanted to build up her ability to walk so she could go on a trip, which would involve a lot of walking. She started by walking to her mailbox every day, and we just gradually enhanced it, and she was able to go on that vacation later on. So make sure that you are choosing activities that you enjoy, like dancing, like maybe riding your bike to work, maybe gardening, cleaning, parking far away so that you have to walk a little further, using the stairs, maybe even going for a nature walk. As I mentioned before, if you're not a fan of running, you don't want to start with running as the activity that you're going to pursue. Find something that you might be willing to stick with. There are also a number of practices that engage the mind-body connection. So I'm going to teach a couple of breathing exercises that we can use in moments where we're feeling a lot of tension. So one of these is called an ocean breath, and it's great to use with kids as well. If people have difficulty breathing, which can be anxiety provoking for some, instead you can simply suggest that they let out a sigh, because the exhale is not as anxiety provoking as breathing. But the ocean breath is kind of like a sigh where we make noise and we put a ha sound at the beginning. So you take a deep belly breath in or expand your rib cage in all directions and then let out a sigh starting with ha. Deep inhale. And it's called an ocean breath because it sounds like the waves of the ocean. So that's a great tool to give to kids when they are starting to escalate. We can ask them to take an ocean breath. We can also use for very strong emotion what's called an O breath. So again, that's a deep inhale, but when we exhale, we're going to form our lips into an O shape and let just a thin stream of air escape from our lips. So the goal is to make our exhale last up to 60 seconds. So join me if you would like. Take a deep inhale, shape lips like an O, and exhale. And I think of a really big red balloon that's filled up with emotion, and we're just letting a little air out at a time and watching it deflate. An alternative to that is a shh breath, where we make that sound. And we also use our 2 fingers to kind of trace an S motion. So again, it kind of makes us think of that balloon moving all over the room, letting out the big emotion. And then another breathing exercise we can use is called unilateral breathing, and it gets our mind focused. So for instance, if you're having trouble shutting off thoughts about work and you need to focus your mind, this is a great one. I also presented this at a conference not long ago and had someone reach out not long after and said they were working with a teacher who had nearly had a panic attack, and they used this goofy nose breathing and it worked. It brought this person back down to baseline. So it integrates both our right and left hemispheres of the brain as well. So it does look a little silly, this goofy nose breathing or unilateral breathing. So I'm going to use my thumb on the right side of my nose to close off that nostril, and I'll use my ring or pinky finger for the left side. So let me take us through a couple rounds of this. First, I'm going to close off my right nostril, Inhale through the left. Switch fingers and exhale through the right. Inhale through the right. Switch fingers. Exhale through the left. Inhale through the left. Switch fingers. Exhale through the right. Inhale through the right. Switch fingers. Exhale through the left. Take a moment to notice. Was your mind wandering at all? Were you able to focus on anything else while you were doing that? That's what makes it such a fantastic exercise. Body scans involve just scanning our body and noticing where we're feeling any tension or pain. A progressive muscle relaxation means we go through our muscle groups from head to toe and progressively tense and then relax each of those groups. You can find a number of scripts for those online or recordings of those. A shaking meditation looks a little silly, but I'm willing to look silly if this is going to be helpful to you all. This is a way that we can metabolize at the end of our workday everything that we've been taking on. And it's something really fun to do with little children, but it does look a little silly. So feel free to skip this if you're not interested in it. But it's just simply shaking our body. And I start by shaking my shoulders, shrugging them up and down, and let it flow into my arms. And feel free to join me if you would like. I bounce all around and sometimes let out sighs while I'm shaking. And if you do this for a minute or more, you usually feel a great sense of lightness when you finish. So I had one consultee who said they do this at the end of every single shift, because it helps them just shake off their day. Someone else said that they feel really tired at the end of work, and so much so that they don't always want to cook dinner. If they do this shaking, it'll raise their energy level just enough that it'll get them through to cooking dinner and have an enjoyable rest of the evening. So yoga is also a practice that engages our mind and body. And yoga is something that can be done even at your desk. It doesn't require a lot of skill to do some basic yoga moves, including chair yoga. And we won't be doing any handstands or anything too difficult today, but we are going to do a yoga demonstration. So I created this chair yoga video at the beginning of the pandemic, and I had to get pretty vulnerable to show myself practicing yoga. But I found that it's been very helpful to the people who attend my training. So I'm willing to share that. I do give a brief disclaimer. I am not a registered yoga teacher, but I have had training in teaching chair yoga. And yoga has been really life-changing for me. It's shown in the research to reduce stress and symptoms of trauma, anxiety, and depression. Allows us to excrete stress hormones through our urine because it allows us to relax when we're doing it. So yoga means to yoke or join together. And it's not a religious practice, although some view it as spiritual. So I hope that this demonstration will give us an ability to connect not only to our authentic selves, but to connect to one another through movement.
Welcome to the chair yoga portion of our training. Chair yoga is accessible to everyone. It doesn't matter your fitness level or whether or not you have mobility issues. It's something that almost everyone can do. The wonderful thing about yoga is that we practice what we call ahimsa, which is being kind to ourselves, giving ourselves grace. So it's important to keep in mind that if any of these poses are uncomfortable for you, you can stop them, you can skip them, you can do a modification. Just above all, be kind to your body. Alignment's extremely important because we don't want to do any damage to our spine. So we want to keep our head and our spine in alignment the entire time. So we like to sit in yoga or stand with a tall spine that's not stiff, but is tall and straight. So you can imagine a string coming out of the top of your head, lifting you up. We want to pull in our navel towards our spine to support our back. Shoulders should be Relax down away from our ears and maybe even rolled slightly back. We want your ears directly over your shoulders, so you may have to push your chin back just a little to get that alignment. And our shoulders are stacked over our hips. Again, our knees are over our ankles and our feet are planted firmly on the ground in front of us. Get settled in, and we're going to start with breathing. So we're going to inhale for 4 counts and then exhale for 4 counts. So go ahead and do it with me. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 2, 3, 4. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Exhale. Inhale, and now exhale with a sigh. Inhale, and exhale with that sigh. Couple more. And now exhale through your nose. One more. Now we're going to add arms. So inhale with our palms up, and on our exhale, we're going to bring arms down with the palms facing down. So again, inhale and exhale. Inhale, arms go up, and exhale. Inhale, and exhale. One more. Inhale and exhale. Excellent. Now we're going to stretch our neck a bit. So we're going to start by taking our chin down to our chest. And then our chin towards our right shoulder. Our chin up to the sky. And our chin towards our left shoulder. Again, chin to chest. Chin to right shoulder. Chin up to the sky. And chin to our left shoulder. And now we'll make that a little smoother. So chin to chest, and slowly roll your neck. One more. And return to our chin to chest, and then we're going to switch sides. So chin to chest, chin towards left shoulder, chin up to the sky, and chin towards right shoulder. Chin to chest, chin towards our left shoulder, chin up to the sky, and chin to our right shoulder. Now let's make that more fluid. Start chin to chest, and just gently roll that neck. One more. Excellent. So now we're going to work a little bit on our shoulders. We have been hunching over laptops for quite some time, and we probably have a lot of tension in our shoulders. So let's start by just rolling our shoulders back. Now we're going to do some arm circles. So take arms out to the side and just roll those back. Now we're going to stretch our triceps. So take our right hand up to the sky, and we're going to bend the elbow and drop our right hand in between our shoulder blades. If you'd like, you can take your left hand and just nudge it, just invite that hand to go down a little bit further in the middle of our back. Feel a nice stretch in our shoulders and in our triceps in the middle of our back. Take a couple breaths here. exhale, release. Now the other side. So inhale our left arm up, bend our elbow, and with an exhale, drop that hand between the shoulder blades. Again, you can use your right hand to invite this hand a little bit further down your back. Feel that stretch, and let's just hold it and take a couple breaths here. So inhale, exhale, inhale. On our exhale, we can release down to the sides. One more great shoulder exercise. Looks a little silly, but it feels really good. It gets into our shoulder blades. So if we take our hands up into our shoulders and point our elbows forward, we're going to actually take our elbows up over our head, and it looks like we're doing some really deep circles into our shoulder blades. So bring those elbows up as if they're going all the way over our head and circle them around. Let's do one more of those. Excellent. Relax. One more shoulder exercise that we can do is taking our hands to our heart center and then starting to make circles with our hands. Start with small circles. And then we're going to expand the circle, which expands our range of motion. Feel that in your shoulder blades, your shoulders, maybe even in your neck. It's important here to remember to keep that navel pulled back towards your spine to support your back. Let's switch directions here. Start small. Make sure you're breathing on all the exercises. Make those circles really big now. Get full range of motion there. Excellent. We're going to open up our sides a little bit. So let's start by inhaling our right arm up. We're going to keep our left hand planted alongside of our left thigh, so you can even grip onto the chair if you would like. And it's really important here to keep your bottom, both of your buttocks, grounded into your seat. So don't lift all the way up as you lean over, because you might topple over. It's super important to keep this right hip grounded into your seat. So with that, we're going to lean over and exhale. Feel a really nice stretch through your side here. Keep breathing through the exercise. Keep that navel pulled in towards the spine. And inhale back up to a neutral position. Exhale your arm down. Now we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Inhale your left arm up. And exhale, keeping those sitting bones rooted. Lean just over to the right. Couple breaths here. And up to a neutral position, and exhale that arm down. So we've been typing a lot, right? And we don't often think about stretching our hands and our wrists, but using those tiny laptops, we're getting a lot of use out of them right now. So let's stretch out our hands a little. So extend your right forearm in front of you, and we're gonna one by one press back each of our fingers. Just feel a nice stretch there. You can feel it move up to your wrist. Sure that you continue to breathe even when we're stretching our hands. You can get your thumb there. You can even take all 4 fingers at once if you would like. And now let's try the other side. So left forearm's extended. Start with your pinky finger. your thumb. And now let's do all 4 fingers together. And release. We're going to do a spinal twist now. So I'm going to take my left hand and I'm going to place it on the outside of my right knee, and I'm going to start to twist to the right. However, it's really important here that we continue to stay in alignment. So as we twist gently to the right, we're going to want our gaze to follow and look over our right shoulder as we either place our right arm behind us on the chair or we touch the seat with the chair, and just gently twist to the right, your gaze following. It's a really nice stretch here. Take a couple breaths here. And on your next exhale, return to a neutral position. We'll do the same thing on the other side. So my right hand is going to go on the outside of my left knee. My left arm is going to go over the back of the chair, or I'm going to rest it comfortably beside me. And my gaze is going to follow as I gently twist to the left. Couple breaths here. And on your next exhale, go ahead and return to a neutral position. That concludes the chair yoga portion of our training. Thank you for being vulnerable enough and curious enough to practice. The light in me sees the light in all of you. Namaste.
Namaste. That is literally what it means. The divine or the light in me sees the divine or the light in you. And so now you're invited to notice. How did that practice make you feel? Be lighter, looser, less tense, maybe more connected to your feelings or to your body? And if you did enjoy this practice, there are a number of yoga resources on your resource list. So thank you to those of you who are willing to practice and give it a try. We'll move now into social wellness, which is building sustainable, positive connections with individuals and community. We are wired for connection, love, and belonging. It's a biological imperative. And humans are interdependent. If we weren't, then we would each be able to fix our own cars and cure our own illnesses. But we need one another's talents and gifts. And so we have to be able to ask for help when we need it and give help when we have the energy and resources to do so. We want to keep in mind that all of us feel awkward reaching out. This is Brene Brown's tagline: be the first to be awkward, brave, and kind. We want to maximize the time that we spend in relationships that are uplifting, that are edifying, and minimize the time that we spend in toxic relationships. And we know that we can't necessarily end relationships that drain our energy, but we certainly want to be aware of how these relationships feel for us. We want to set boundaries by saying no when we need to recharge. And many of us are socialized to always give of ourselves, but it's important to recognize, just like oxygen masks on the airplane, we cannot help anyone else with their oxygen until we've secured our own oxygen mask. We want to recognize also that all of us have times when we feel like we don't belong. It's a universal human experience. And so we want to understand that that doesn't necessarily mean that we don't belong. Our feelings aren't facts. Resourcing is a tool that we use in the therapeutic world to recall all of our supports, to remind us that we have others who care for us and want to support us. And one of the ways we might do that for think of everyone or write down the names of everyone who has impacted you in a positive way into the person that you are today. I had a friend post this as a mindfulness challenge. List 50 people who contributed to who you are today. And at first that sounds overwhelming, 50 people. But when you think back to all of the coaches and teachers and neighbors and colleagues and people who have touched your lives, it's really not difficult to think of 50 people who would support you or have supported you thus far. You may also choose to contribute to a larger cause. When you volunteer or find a way to give back in your community, you feel more connected. You might be focused on a cause that you care about. It might help you notice your unique strengths and gifts that you bring to the table. It gives us that sense of belonging, and it might help us even to help care for our planet. Moving into intellectual wellness, we want to challenge the mind, engage in creativity and problem solving. So we can foster intellectual wellness by admiring art or architecture. This is the beautiful music hall in Cincinnati. We can become creative even if we don't particularly have artistic talent. We can do it by creating a recipe or by crafting or giving it a try doing something creative or artistic. We can write in a journal or write poetry. We can make music or create a dance that goes along with music, maybe even posting it to TikTok, who knows? We can create a vision board. The law of attraction tells us that when we put out into the universe the things that we want, we are more likely to bring them back to us. And a vision board helps us do this. It's as simple as cutting out photos from a magazine that speak to you or speak to your vision for your future. We can think of new ways to help or give back to others, and we can learn about new topics of interest by taking a class, reading, or learning a new hobby. This is from Dan Siegel, an interpersonal neurobiologist. This is his Healthy Mind Platter, and he reminds us that just like we need a balanced diet, we need a balance in the ways we use our mind and our time. So he encourages us to do each of these practices daily, to have focus time when we're doing our work or focusing on tasks in goal-oriented ways, playtime where we enjoy novel experiences, we're spontaneous and creative, connecting time where we connect with others around us, physical time where we move our bodies, time in where we reflect internally, downtime where we don't have any specific goals, that might be Netflix time, for instance, and then sleep time where we rest. Play is also important to our intellectual wellness. Stuart Brown is a researcher on play who defines it by saying it is purposeless activity, like there's no end goal in mind when we're playing. It's all consuming. It takes all of our energy, all of our attention. We find our flow. And it's also fun. Play helps us learn and become smarter at any age. And Stuart Brown gives us this quote: "The opposite of play is not work, it's depression." Pictured here is Daryl Edwards. He has a TED Talk called Why Working Out Isn't Working Out. He also has a website called Primal Play, which gives a number of examples of games that you can play. And some of us may have never learned how to play, especially if you had many children in your household and your parents didn't have time to play alongside you. You may not have learned certain games, so you can learn some new ones from Daryl Edwards. He's on your resource list. And Brene Brown had a great idea on her podcast. She said, find activities that meet these 3 criteria. And as a family, you can make a list of your top 5 that would be considered play. Maybe charades, maybe board games, kayaking, cycling, mini golf, puzzles, all kinds of different things. And you compare lists with your other family members. And if you have some in common, then those are the play dates that you set. Emotional wellness, which is, we've talked about a great deal. This is mindfulness of what we're feeling and making the choice to cultivate optimism and mutual respect and trust. So emotional wellness is this main event of wellness or trauma-informed self-care, where we reflect, we notice our thoughts and how they affect our emotions. So we may choose to journal. If we have feelings towards other people, we may vent in letters that we write but never send. We can use a worry box or a blues box to let go of things that aren't serving us well. I used to use this when I was a child therapist, and I would say, these adult concerns are too much for you, so let me hold on to them. And I found that this is really helpful for adults as well. We can make a choice to practice optimism and hope. When we do that, we are using neuroplasticity. So if our habit of mind is to think, oh, things won't be better, We have a really well-carved neural connection, neural pathway that it reflects our habit of mind. When we do something over and over, that neural connection gets strengthened or myelinated. And when we choose to think of things in a new way, we create a new neural connection. And if that can become our habit of mind, then that neural connection gets strengthened. So gratitude in particular has been shown to rewire our brain in this way. If we're thinking negative thoughts, if we're ruminating, we can make a choice to replace those thoughts with one of gratitude. The more that we do this, the more that a mindset of gratitude becomes possible. Other gratitude practices we can do are thinking of ways that your basic needs are met, the people that you're grateful for, maybe even telling people that you're grateful for them. Self-compassion is the work of Kristen Neff. There are 3 steps to self-compassion. Rather than berating ourselves when we're having a tough feeling, we use mindful awareness to acknowledge suffering. We then recognize that suffering is a common part of humanity. It's normal. And then we nurture ourselves and speak to ourselves as though we were a beloved friend or relative. We want to cater to our feelings rather than stuffing them down. I use this practice in my therapy practice where we call out the emotion that we're feeling. We accept it just like it is. We accept it just like we would accept the weather status outside. And then we tame it through emotional regulation skills, many of which we've talked about in terms of breathing exercises today. And you may even consider your own psychotherapy. And if you think that that's only for your clients, I encourage you to reconsider, to recognize that it's not that you need therapy because you are so messed up you need professional help. It's that everyone is worthy of having the support of a professional to give them a safe space to process their experiences. So check with your employer to see if you have an employee assistance program or check with your health insurance for the copay. And finally, spiritual wellness, understanding your own values and beliefs, embracing the diversity of others' worldviews. Religious practices and spirituality buffer secondary trauma and burnout. So consider how you might put your trust in a higher power if you believe in one, or consider starting a spiritual practice. It can be as simple as a loving kindness meditation or a metta meditation, which is as simple as may we all be happy, healthy, safe, and may we all live with ease. This can be modified in any way, and it's a great way to send out wishes when you're not certain if everyone you're working with is doing okay. It's a way to just send out wishes for others' well-being and for your own. We want to balance by setting boundaries when and where we can, by setting our own pace and prioritizing and asking for help. And finally, we want to remember that self-care and wellness are not selfish. When we're deciding what we want to do, we want to be intentional because you're investing in yourself. So set boundaries, say no to things you can't do. Begin with one small change and use SMART objectives to make your self-care strategies a habit. Tell others about your plan, find an accountability buddy, make tiny incremental changes, get just 1% better every day. That comes from James Clear, who wrote Atomic Habits. And if you miss a day, no worries. Try very hard not to miss 2 in a row. But above all, be kind to yourself. And I close out with one final cartoon where the heart says, I'm going to bed. Wake me up when the world is fixed. And the brain says, sorry, heart, the world needs you. And that's how I feel about all of you as helping professionals. Thank you so much for all the hard work that you do. Please be sure that you are taking care of yourself. I think we have just a couple minutes left if we had any questions today.
All right. Thank you so much, Faye. I appreciate you handling any technical issues we were having throughout and still keeping your mojo flow all the way through. So well done. I don't know if we'll be able to get into any questions today, but again, you have Faye's email address here. So if you have any questions related to the content, feel free to reach out to her. Holly and I were dropping some information in the chat as well. You'll see that we are recording this training, and we'll have it edited, make sure the sound sounds really great, and get that posted so it is available for you all. We also will send them out. I believe we already sent the slides out once, but we can send those out again so you guys have access to the slides. And then I am dropping a link again into the chat for your continuing education credit. We will also send that out via email to only attendees that were actually in the session today. So you should be able to fill all that out. But if there are any issues, you can reach out to Holly or myself and we'll be able to assist you. Again, thank you so much, Faye. Holly, thank you for grabbing Faye and asking her to present for us. I think it was a needed topic, and the examples real life examples that you shared and tools that we could take away was really, really helpful, at least on my front. Holly, any last words before I send folks off?
I just want to thank everyone for your patience as well. It was a wonderful presentation, and like Elena said, it'll be posted, and we'll do what we can on the back end to adjust volume. It'll be captioned as well, and just let you know, Faye, you're getting lots of praise in the comments.
Great. Well, have a great rest of your day, everyone. And again, thank you so much for attending, and thank you so much, Faye.